As a person of working class origin, I think that's important, whose family was not at all professional, um, carnival, like cricket, for us, meant a great deal. As I was growing up in Barbados and in Oxford. Um, Yet it was an activity which we didn't participate in as a family because of my father's religious scruples and my mum's concern for our safety as children growing up and as young teenagers. Um, as a consequence, I didn't experience carnival as an activity until my first visit to Notting Hill in the 1960s. I came to this country in 1957. But carnival existed as a concept where Calypso music was played and people drank and made merry. But that all happened entirely in my head. I never actually saw it. But what was going on in my head was fed by my knowledge of Barbadian life from within the community, the village that I lived in Barbados. We knew how people performed Christmas time and people going around in small groups, small bands, playing drums and steel bands and such like. So you just imagine that on a grand scale for carnival. But carnival per se, as a child growing up in Barbados until the age of 11, I never saw it. And I came to this country. And of course, we didn't have carnival in Barbados as they do in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a grand thing there. It was not a grand thing in Barbados. But what there was, I didn't see. But that was still important, this idea of carnival going on in my head. Because it was constructed, what was going on was constructed around my knowledge of Calypso and the kind of improvised dancing that goes on in back gardens and yards of people making merry and having fun, drinking rum. Not me or my family, but it's what you saw, what you were aware of. So music and dance and that sort of merriment or merrymaking emerged from our sensibilities, our rhythmic sense, our love of color and sense of fun, right? And then you transfer that over to the grand scale of carnival, but in your imagination. I think that's important to remember, to hold on to in terms of my development as an artist, and even my art making activities today is very much based on what's going on in my head, not what I see. I don't go to carnival and make drawings. I never make drawings at carnival. It's all imaginary. It's all about me, really, not about carnival, but about me. Its relationship, carnival, its relationship to my work is absolutely fundamental. I draw, as I was just saying, I draw on my memory of people dancing at parties or in our yard back home. When they, and the way they carried their bodies when they were dancing. The gestures, cute gestures that people make, this kind of idiosyncratic movements and peculiarities of people. I think I have a very good visual memory, and I remember all of this. And so I made, as a child, later, I made up these paintings of these people carrying themselves in particular ways. And even one of my pieces that were shown at the Tate, the dance at Reddington Hall, the largest piece I had on show there, that was based on a dance at Reddington Hall that I was involved in playing in a band. I was playing on the stage and I saw people interacting and dancing and moving in particular ways, particularly members of my family and close friends of the family who were dancing amongst the crowd. And because they're family members, you really kind of, locked onto them. You watch to see what they were doing. And my brother's wife, who actually sang in the band as well, but when she wasn't singing, she'd be on the floor dancing. And I memorized her movements, the way she kind of held her hands up in particular ways, as I was playing on stage. And she's in the painting. My father's in the painting because he managed the band. It's very much a family band. But he was dancing with this woman called Mrs. Jones, who was the grandmother, in fact, of my my brother's first child. And my father was dancing with Mrs. Jones in a particular way. And I remember he's wandering across my line of vision. And I memorized it. For some reason, I memorized a particular way he was dancing and how his coat went down beneath. He had a very long jacket, almost down to his knees, it seemed to me. But I remembered all of that, and I kind of put it in the painting. So the dance at Runnington Hall is, again, from memory, no sketches made. I was busy playing in the band, but I kind of like taken photographs, mental photographs of what was happening, and transferred it to the painting. So that's the way I operated. And that's the importance of carnival being in inverted commas for me. And it's very much a child of Windrush, and I think it's very different from being just a member of the Windrush generation. As a child of Windrush, I had very particular experiences that were particular to me, as opposed to the adults of that period, my parents and other people. Particularly as I was brought up in Oxford. My parents lived in Oxford. They came over in 55. And they made a base for themselves and actually bought a house in 2 years. A good, large property as well. But they work like stink, both of them. Saved up money and bought a house in Oxford. And then they sent for the family and got us over in 57. And I was 11 years old. And I was, obviously it's wonderful meeting up with my parents again after 2 years. There's all sorts of stuff there, but we don't want to be talking about that now. But I was sent to the local secondary modern school. I didn't take the 11 plus. I missed that. Obviously that would have happened had I been in primary school here. But I never went into primary school in this country. I came 2 weeks into the start of the secondary school year. So I was at the beginning of the my secondary period of education, but 2 weeks into it. So I didn't really get to meet my schoolmates and such like. And that was important because I was a stranger in all sorts of ways. Black. The first black kid to go to that school. The first black kid, I'm sure, along with my brother Charlie. He was at the school as well, but he's 3 years older than me. And I'm 14, going on 15. And at the age of 15, he's required to leave. So for the rest of the time, I was on my own. And then I was absolutely the only black kid of secondary school age, arguably in the whole of Oxford. I mean, it's hard to believe that. You think, well, how do you know that then? Well, I know it because my father started cutting hair. He did that in Barbados as well, along with other jobs. He was a cooper by training. He used to make barrels, going back to the slave trade, barrels of sugar and molasses and rum and stuff like that. He was actually in that trade. But he did other things to earn money. And barrel brewing was one of them. And when he came here, he cut hair to earn more money. And hence buying a house in next to no time in Oxford. But there were very few Caribbean people in Oxford then. Very, very few. And mostly men. And virtually all of them came to our home to have their hair cut. He was the only black barber. So I got to see these men coming in from St. Vincent, from Montserrat, from Guyana, from Jamaica. I'd never seen the Jamaicans and Montserratans before I came to Britain. And in my father's home, there they were. And had these peculiar accents, peculiar to me. But, we got on well. I liked them, respected and loved them, really. But through them, you got to know of families, their families and so on back home. There were very, very, very few kids here, even toddlers. And I knew of no other child of secondary school age. I heard of none. So I'm absolutely certain that there are no other black kids of secondary school age from the Caribbean. There might have been one or two from Africa in private education. I didn't see any, but that may well have been. But they would have been, they would have been living in a very different area of Oxford, associated with the university and such like. So that was my experience of coming to this country and being placed in this dreadful, dreadful secondary modern school where they hated me. The head teacher despised me, as well as the form teacher, the teacher who was head of the form that I was placed in. 2 form entry, A and B. A for the brighter kids, B for the kids who are, pooled together, who were not so bright, supposedly. And it put me into the B stream. In Barbados, I was doing all kinds of stuff, doing Spanish in primary school. I was learning Spanish. I was saying Richard III and reading about Shakespeare in Barbados because it's very academic. And so I just don't want to look at me and think, you're from the colonies, you're black, you're the first black kid in Oxford, you're going into the B stream. They put me in there and they kept the lid on me, kept me in that class for the whole of my school career, secondary school career, even though it's coming up the top in exams. The kids who were way behind me, they promoted them, but they wouldn't promote me. Anyway, I'm just saying that. And there's also sorts of racism I don't want to hear about now. But in the 3rd year, I just developed this ability to make artwork. As I said, I've got a good memory for visual things. And my mum and I used to go into the center of town every Saturday to shop. And, we'd take a double-decker from across the road. The bus station was across the road. And I would sit on, as a kid, because I went upstairs, I was excited by that, and she'd stay downstairs. And we drove into town to shop at Corn Market in Oxford. But the journey into town from Duncoley Road, over Malton Bridges, Malton College, and all the university buildings, I was fascinated by it all. It's the only time I went into town, every Saturday morning. And I drank it all in, the students on their bicycles with their long scarves and, their capes, and looking into the windows of All Souls and Magdalen and other colleges and seeing the stacked books on these beautiful oak shelves, and the gargoyles in the buildings and stuff, the spires and domes and Radcliffe camera in the background. I took it all in. And in school, because the art lessons weren't structured well, we were allowed to do what we liked. So I painted pictures of Oxford every week from memory. And I remembered all the swirling masses and the bicycles and the Cherwell and the Isis and rivers and all that. And I put them into my paintings. And I came top in art, won the school prize. This was flimsy rubbish, really, but still, it was a notable moment because I'd come top in art in the whole school, And then there's a sort of buzz and noise going on around me in relation to my artwork from the teacher. I didn't know I was any good. I didn't know how to judge it. I just did art. And I remember I was walking across the playground one day, and this temporary teacher, a supply teacher or something, was walking the other way. He didn't know me, I didn't know him. And he turned around and he said, "Are you Paul Nash?" I said, "No, sir, I'm Paul Dash." And that moment stuck in my memory. I thought, because I'd known by then who Paul Nash was. And it's obvious that he associated me with great art. That's the way I saw it anyway. And it stayed with me. And I thought, they're talking about me in the staff room. I must be quite good at this thing. The work I painted at home was my true art. And that's when I started making carnival paintings. I never made them in school. I didn't want people to see, to have a peek into my life, my private life in my art. I didn't want them to see and be critical of Caribbean people dancing and making merry as I saw it. So I didn't show my work to people at college or the College of Further Education, or certainly at school. But when I applied to art college, I took work there, and they were very impressed. I just got in. I got in and did my foundation in art and design at Oxford Tech. And that year, on the foundation year, was the best year I had in art education, under Leonard Macomb, who became keeper of the Royal Academy. He understood me, could get under my skin, understood who I was as a person, as an artist. I actually went to his home, to actually look after things for him when he went away to Spain. He asked me to go and look after his sculptures, his sculptor. He trusted me to do that. It was just an amazing, amazing, amazing year. At the end of it, I applied to Chelsea. I applied to Chelsea Art College. I got in almost at interview. They didn't say it to me like that, but I knew I was in. Hated it. Hated the 3 years I had there because it was just not my kind of environment. Oxford was my kind of environment because of Leonard Macomb and his staff and what they did. And a lot of the work was figurative. Chelsea was dreadful, as I've said. For me, it's a hard-edged school, modernist school. I was very much a traditional painter. At Art College in Oxford, Leonard Macomb was a very figurative artist, and the kind of environment he created as one that was very traditionalist. And that's the kind of ethos I enjoyed, where I felt at home. Chelsea was modernist. In the 3 years I was there, I never saw a model in the normal course. I was on a degree course myself. They got models in for evening classes. They weren't run by the degree staff, but by other people. It's kind of open to the general public for the college to make a bit of money. And I joined those classes to work from the nude model. And I absolutely loved that. But the normal run of things, figure-field relationships and all that kind of stuff that we're talking about, I was interested in doing traditional artwork. And I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy at all. And at the end of my second year, I was showing in an exhibition somewhere at the Commonwealth Society, I think. And I'd never heard of black artists. Yeah, I'd seen a photograph of one black artist who happened to be Frank Bowling, who was at the Royal College. And he was in a catalogue, a photograph of him holding his son up in a catalogue for an exhibition for a book called Private View. And there was Frank Bowling, and he was the first contemporary black artist that I had heard of. By the way, I was involved in this exhibition at the Commonwealth Society, and I don't know, I can't remember how I got in, how I was invited to show or whatever, but anyway, my work was there. And I was looking at something on the wall, and I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and it was John LaRose. And John LaRose, of course, started New Beacon's bookshop and the Caribbean Artist Movement. He's at the center of developing the Caribbean Artist Movement with Kamau Brathwaite and various other people. And he said, I'd like you to join the Caribbean Artist Movement. Have you heard of it? I said, no. He said, well, it's a movement that we started for Caribbean artists in Britain, writers, any creative people, potters, painters, photographers, anybody. Would you like to join? I said, of course I'd like to join. And so I became a member of the Caribbean Artist Movement. And actually, they put me on the committee as well because I was young. I was the youngest member. And they were looking to the future. And we had meetings. in Albert Road, where John and Sarah, his wife, had their home. She died last year. The bookshop, that's now Stroud Green Road, New Beacons Book, didn't exist then. It was in their home, rather. They started a bookshop in their home. Shelves in their front room stacked with books everywhere. And I remember they had little people coming around to speak. And I remember this woman, Beryl McBurney, who was a dancer from Trinidad, came to speak to the group. And she just threw her shoes off. We all sat on the floor because there weren't enough chairs. The people who were there all sat on the floor in a circle. And she threw her shoes off and she started dancing and moving and twirling around. I'll never forget it. And I thought, wow, what an environment. What about people, creative and they uninhibited, they're articulate in a way I never was. Articulate in all sorts of ways. And it just blew my mind. But attending those meetings, Andrew Salke was another member of the committee. Wilson Harris, the Guyanese writer who became, was knighted. But Andrew Salke was a lovely, lovely Jamaican man. And he had a meeting, one of the meetings, because we went to different homes. We had a meeting, and Alcia McNeish was also a member, of course, and she's got this exhibition now at the Whitworth Gallery, and I'm participating in that. We went to Andrew Salke's home and met his wife. And it's just the experience of being with a man like that. And don't forget, we had this conversation. He took me seriously. I couldn't believe that anyone would take me seriously. Because I had a terrible education, you see, in Oxford. We didn't do any homework. We never had any, we weren't taken to a library. There was no school library. There was nothing. It's just child minding with a whip. You do as you're told, we smack you one. That's all it was. There's no question of education. So there are these people, Andrew Salkin treated me, a man so sophisticated, using language so well, treated me with utter respect. Talking to me about Fidel Castro, because he knew Fidel Castro. And you say, yes, not showing off, he's talking to me in a group of people, you say, and yes, so when I met Fidel, I thought, Christ, he met Fidel. And he's talking about giving us some anecdote about some joke Castro cracked and how they went off to various places in Havana, met this and that person. I thought, this is, I'm really a fish out of water in an environment like this. And, I'm moved and thrilled, but they're up there educationally and in their experience. They're older than me as well. I was very much a 19-year-old kid, about 20-year-old by then, but I was very inhibited. And we spoke about Fidel Castro, and he wrote a book actually about it called, I can't remember what it's called at the moment, but he wrote a book about that experience in Cuba, meeting Fidel and doing various other things. But that's all my experience of, and Kamal Brathwaite, the Barbadian, of course. Had enormous respect for him. I loved the man. Great poet. And recently, I'm delighted to say I was invited to Barbados to contribute to an exhibition in celebration of his memory. In celebration of his memory, but his name, because he's still alive then when I went to Barbados a few years ago. But I remember him giving a recital at the Commonwealth. It's a West Indian Student Centre in Earl's Court, the West Indian Student Centre, which existed then, not now. And he was reading from Islands, and the performance, the way he was speaking, I am not, I am not. The way he was articulating. It was extraordinary being with those people. Maybe that was where my education started, through the Caribbean Artist Movement. It really was extraordinary. And I'll never forget it. I was very fortunate. I feel like I didn't get as much from it as I could have done, because I couldn't contribute as much to it as I would have liked to, because of my lack of education, because of the abuse of my intellect by that school. Anyway, incredibly accommodating, very, very bright. And it was a privilege being part of that setup. There's two artists whose names I should have mentioned from CALM, Aubrey Williams and Ronald Moody. There are two people I met there. I mean, Aubrey was at the center of CALM, Aubrey Williams, and Ronald Moody, the wonderful sculptor. I met him once and we took it to his studio. And lovely, dignified man. I should never forget those. Along with Errol Lloyd, they're for me were and Althea McNeish, they were the artists whom I really resonated with. I mean, we chose the theme, carnival. But in fact, there's very little on carnival from what we saw. And it was very, very difficult to select work that would work alongside what we were hoping to do. And I think we all found that very, very challenging. You know, to find work that in line or supported what I visualize as carnival was horrifying. Nothing about the pieces, neither the subjects, the people represented, or the culture in which their stories were told and played out. That's to say, the artifacts we looked at. None of these things seemed to resonate with what we wanted to do as artists looking at, you know, with a Caribbean background, look at the whole notion of carnival. So that was very, very trying. But over time, individual things were identified and individual artists. For example, Bruegel. Came across a picture of Bruegel. I thought, I must have Bruegel, because to my mind, his depiction of crowds was a memory of my bus trips in Oxford with my mum, looking down at the swirling masses. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not like for like, but certainly the idea of looking down on people, he did that. And beautifully, the drawings, the sense of fun, the movements, the figures, the drawings, all of that. I just love Bruegel. I've always loved Bruegel. From the first moment I saw the first piece of his work that I saw, I've been, to use that term, blown away by his art. And to be showing alongside him gives you goosebumps, you know, because he's one of the greatest artists of the millennium. Not just you know, I mean, he's one of the great artists from anywhere of the millennium, as far as I'm concerned. And Dewar as well, obviously. And then, you know, honored to be participating in an exhibition in which they're playing a part. Those works were created at a time when my ancestors, enslaved ancestors, were deposited in the Caribbean, and literally at a time, and they wouldn't imagine a time when their direct descendants in myself, or a direct descendants, would one day be showing alongside those great masters. They wouldn't have known of the masters, obviously, but, you know, I mean, Bruegel, 1632. Our ancestors would have been taken to the Caribbean at about that time. And so there is that sense of awe that I'm where I am, doing what I am, and being privileged by you guys to be showing alongside those wonderful artists. But at the same time, I throw my mind back to my ancestors at a time when these people that we've been talking about were functioning as artists, and the implications of all that. As an artist, as a person, you're constantly reflecting who you are and where you came from. You know, with this exhibition and looking at the work of those masters and how we're communicating with each other over the centuries by sharing that space. as artists, you just communicate. And even though I've never known those people, the Picassos and the, and the Bruegels and the Dormiers and Dewars, Van Goghs, you feel that if we met, if we were to meet here now, we'd have a way of communicating as artists. One or two of them may have problems with me, the black person. But I think that we have this commonality of experience that's about being an artist, this madness of being an artist. And so it's almost like showing alongside them, apart from obviously being absolutely in awe of them, you feel that they probably think it's quite appropriate that as an artist today, we'll be communicating together, by working together, sharing the same space, if that makes any sense. And I find that deeply moving. And I can't begin to thank Kettle's Yard enough for making it possible. The Caribbean experience of European traditions in art ultimately came together for me in the first instance in the church. My parents were Christian, practicing Christians. We all went to church in Barbados on Sundays, twice a day, twice on Sundays. As such, we always had reproductions of painting, and at home, we always had reproductions of paintings and scenes from the Passion by European artists. The Crucifixion, Christ performing some wonderful miracle, his meeting with disciples, and of course the Last Supper, that kind of stuff. There were no names attached to the reproductions, but they were there in the background always. And they were the only paintings I saw as a child, in a formal sense, right through, not only in my childhood in Barbados, but in Oxford, until I started going to art college, do my foundation year, and went to the Ashmolean Museum and saw works of art there. If I may jump forward a bit, it's all relating to what I was saying, and I think of Michael Macmillan's installation, the West Indian Front Room, that's now celebrated because it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. So it was in the exhibition at the Tate, Life Between Islands. And in that front room, there's, of course, I think, the Last Supper. So you went into it and you thought, absolutely. This is a West Indian front room, And mine was like that. And of course, Faisal Abdul Allah, another Caribbean artist, but a photographer, an extraordinary photographer, who did his own version, his own take on the Last Supper, which is completely different to my experience, because his is a political, hostile, aggressive statement. The emergence of black art in the 1980s was the development of the Caribbean voice as artists in a general sense, and that voice was political. It's all about politics. And of course, I wasn't part of that directly. I was in Wolverhampton. I was part of the group that formed around Sonia and Eddie Chambers and Keith Piper and all that lot, and Rebecca Hamid, people like that. I didn't know anything about them. And so for me, I was at Chelsea, and then I left there and went off before the 1980s. And, I was always working on my own, working in schools, teaching. So that's my experience of it. The uncontrollable creative spirit inherent to carnival is, for me, the unleashing of pent-up energy in the participants at carnival. Not just the performers, the bands, the masqueraders, etc., but ordinary people ordinary people are about carnival, and carnival is about them. People who give vent to their grounded creative ideas in extraordinary dance movements, maybe strange dress and costumes, occasionally in drunken revelry, which is a creative act in itself, a form of performance. Just people expressing themselves and having a good time in the cauldron that is carnival. To my mind, it stems from early times when the enslaved were literally under the cosh and made to work ridiculously long hours for no reward. But when carnival opportunities to party were made possible, they let rip in their bacchanalian ways. It is a feature of carnival, a situation where previously oppressed people, often of poor or ill-educated backgrounds, seem to find a voice, a language in which to express themselves through improvisation, as in steel-bound instrumentation in Trinidad, whilst others stitch fabrics together to make fantastic floats and costumes, which have expression today on the streets of Notting Hill, Port of Spain, Rio, and elsewhere. In the same way we fashion our own oral language, or oral languages in Jamaican or Bajan, Patois, say, linguistic forms at the root of the language of carnival, the root of the music of the great Bob Marley, or the mighty Sparrow, the Calypsonian, or Toots and the Maytals. They represent the genius in the ordinary, in diaspora or diasporic lifestyles. That is carnival for me. I'd say that my show, as in those people playing steel-powered instruments or using patois, my show is about improvisation too. I never work from prepared plans or sketches. That's why the drawings are made so boundaries are not fixed. But you might say the boundaries are fluid. You don't have lines encasing figures in my work. It is difficult to say where things begin and where they end. I love that flexibility and ability to shift from one perception to another in a single drawing. It's a bit like improvisation in jazz, where musicians take their cue from each other as the music moves through time. The music can never be the same, played twice. It is always changing. That's how my style evolved. Sometimes through collage. So I paste paper over areas because I want to make things take things in a different direction. It isn't merely about covering up mistakes. When I put bits of paper over things in my work, in my drawings, it is central to the creative act of advancing the work forward and not effectively going backwards to correct something.